Hi everyone, it's Tatyana from Tatyana's Everyday Food, and in this episode I'm going to be showing you guys how to make a really special and delicious Russian cake called bird's milk, or птичье молоко as it's called in Russian. The actual bird's milk is an airy souffle made of egg whites, butter, sweetened condensed milk, and then sandwiched in between we're going to have layers of sponge cake with fruit preserve, and I'm going to glaze the cake with a really elegant chocolate glaze. So let's get started on our sponge cake. We're going to need 3 eggs. We're gonna need 1/3 cup of white granulated sugar. We need 1/2 cup all-purpose flour. We're also gonna need just 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. Now I have my oven preheating to 350 degrees, and I've also lined an 8-inch cake pan with parchment paper. And you wanna make sure that you don't grease the side of the pan, because that's gonna make the sponge cake just kind of collapse in on itself. So let's get started. I'm gonna add my 1/3 cup sugar into my mixer bowl, and we're gonna add our 3 eggs, and we're gonna beat the eggs and the sugar together until the mixture is really thick and pale, almost white in color. Our egg mixture is ready, and you can see how light and airy it is and almost pale white in color. That's just the way we need it. Now I can add my flour. So we're gonna combine my 1/2 cup flour with 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. Then we're gonna place it into a fine mesh strainer, and we're just gonna slowly sift it into our egg batter here. You wanna kind of sift it in batches, and then take a spatula and just very gently fold everything together. You wanna make sure you combine all that flour before you add more. I've added all my flour into my egg batter, and you want to make sure you don't overmix it, otherwise it's going to lose that airiness. And we're going to transfer it into our prepared cake pan. And then we're going to place it into our preheated oven, and we're going to bake it until it's just golden brown. While our sponge cake is in the oven, we can start preparing for our souffle. So we're going to need 1/2 cup of cold water. We're going to need 2 tablespoons of agar gelatin. And this is like a Japanese seaweed version of gelatin. We're going to combine this with our 1/2 cup of water, and we're gonna let this sit at room temperature for about 30 minutes. And we're also gonna take out 1.5 sticks of butter, and it's gonna be about 3/4 cup. We're gonna let this soften at room temperature. We're also gonna need to take out 6 eggs, and we want the egg whites to be at room temperature before we start whisking them. Just took my sponge cake out of the oven. You can see that nice golden brown color. I'm gonna remove it out of the pan while it's still hot. So you just wanna run a knife along the edge of the cake pan. It's gonna loosen the cake from the edges. And then we're gonna invert it onto our cooling rack. And off. While our sponge cake layer is cooling, we can work on our fruit preserve filling. I'm gonna use 1/2 cup of raspberry preserves, and we just wanna place it into a bowl here. We're also gonna add 1/2 cup of rosé wine. And I think this fruit filling makes for a really moist cake, and that rosé wine will cut through the sweetness. This is a perfect filling for the bird's milk cake. I'm just gonna stir everything together, and you wanna just make sure to break up any of the clumps from the raspberry preserves. You wanna make that mixture nice and uniform. My sponge cake layer has cooled, so now we're gonna take a long serrated knife, and we're gonna split the layer in half. You just wanna start at one end and just work your way around. Okay, now we're gonna turn the other half over. And we're gonna spread both layers with that fruit preserve filling that we prepared. Just want to generously spread it on top. Once this is done, you can go ahead and set your cake layers aside, and we can start working on our souffle. Now we can start working on our bird's milk souffle. So I've had my 6 egg whites sit at room temperature. We're gonna set these aside for now. We're gonna need that 3/4 cup butter softened at room temperature. We're also gonna need 3/4 cup sweetened condensed milk. And then I've had my 2 teaspoons of agar gelatin sitting in this 1/2 cup of cold water for 30 minutes. And I have 1 cup of sugar. So to get started, we're gonna transfer our butter into a large mixer bowl. And we're gonna whisk this on high speed until that butter is really light and fluffy. After we've beat our butter until it's light and fluffy, we're gonna add our 3/4 cup sweetened condensed milk, and we're gonna whisk this also on high speed until it's well incorporated. Whisk together the butter and sweetened condensed milk, and now we're gonna go ahead and take it out of the mixer bowl, just into a small bowl, and we're gonna set it aside for now, but you wanna make sure to keep it at room temperature. Now we're gonna add our 6 egg whites into our mixer bowl, and we're not gonna whisk them just yet, but you wanna make sure that you have them ready. We're also gonna add 1/2 teaspoon cream of tartar, and this is gonna help stabilize the egg whites and it's gonna keep them light and fluffy. Come over to the stovetop and we're gonna start preparing our sugar syrup. So I'm gonna add my agar into a small saucepan. And we wanna bring this to a simmer over medium heat and stirring quite frequently just to make sure that the agar doesn't burn. Our agar gelatin to a simmer, and it's gonna thicken up almost into a jelly-like texture. We wanna simmer it for another minute before we start adding our sugar. After simmering our agar jelly for a minute, we're gonna start adding our sugar. We're gonna add all of it at once. We're gonna stir this all together, and we wanna bring this mixture back up to a simmer. Preparing our sugar syrup, at the same time we want to start whisking our egg whites. So go ahead and turn your mixer on high speed. We want to whisk the egg whites until stiff peaks form. We're going to need a 9-inch springform pan lined with parchment paper. This is where we're going to pour our souffle into, and we're going to keep whisking our egg whites on high speed. We want to make sure that the sugar syrup reaches above 180 degrees, and then we're going to start adding this into our egg whites. This is perfect. Once our sugar syrup is ready, we're gonna start adding it to our egg whites. So we're gonna turn our mixer onto a low-medium speed, and we're gonna slowly pour it in. You wanna keep whisking the egg white and sugar syrup mixture until the egg whites are really light and fluffy. Mixture is ready. We're going to start adding the butter and sweetened condensed milk mixture. We want to add about a spoonful at a time, and we want to slowly add it just so it folds in very nicely and doesn't make the egg whites fall flat. My souffle mixture ready, and we need to work fairly quickly once it's done because it sets up really fast. So we're going to place our first cake layer into our lined springform pan. And we're going to spread a generous amount of the souffle over the top. Spread it evenly with your spatula. And then we're going to follow with our second cake layer. Inside, so just the spacing is even around the edges. And we're going to place the remaining souffle on top. Point around the top of the cake, and we want to make sure that the meringue is really nice and even on the top because we're going to glaze this cake with a chocolate glaze. So we want to make sure it's straight and even across before we set it into the refrigerator. Souffle is setting in the refrigerator. We can work on our chocolate glaze. We're going to need 3/4 cup heavy cream, and then I have 4 ounces of a semi-sweet baking chocolate bar that I've broken into smaller pieces. I'm going to pour my heavy cream into a small saucepan. Also going to add my baking chocolate. I'm going to bring this over to the stovetop, and I'm going to cook it over low-medium heat. Make sure that it doesn't burn. I'm going to whisk it constantly until it's nice and smooth. Just took off my chocolate glaze off the stovetop, and this is what we want our chocolate glaze to look like. That chocolate's completely melted and it's well incorporated with the cream. We want to let this sit for about 10 minutes, not stirring it, so all the air bubbles could dissipate, and then we're going to be ready to glaze our cake. My cake set in the refrigerator for 2 hours, and you want to very carefully remove the spring form off the pan. And then I've set up my cooling rack onto a baking sheet, and then I've lined it with some cling wrap just to make the cleanup process a little bit easier. And I have my chocolate glaze ready here. So what we're going to do, just very carefully pour the chocolate on top. I want to make sure to spread it evenly at the edges. Use my long spatula here. Cake is almost done, and I've transferred it to a nice cake platter here, and I've also drizzled some white chocolate on top, and now I'm just adding a few garnishes, some raspberries and some mint leaves, and I'm going to place it back into the refrigerator for another 3 to 4 hours to set completely, and then our cake is going to be done. And you guys don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I post new videos every single week, and you can also find recipes like this one on my website.